Hey YouTube, welcome back to Ohio Preparedness. It's been a long time. I've got some new videos I'll be recording for you and posting. Lots of different topics, lots of different reviews, and some various knowledges to pass along that I've picked up. Today we're talking about EC8 connectors, which are used for certain solar panel connections, such as the iNergy Apex. The iNergy Apex uses exclusively the EC8 connector for the inverter, and the solar panel connection to the inverter must be an EC8. So after looking on YouTube and Google in general, I found pretty much zero videos showing you how to do soldering for this connector, or showing you how to assemble the connector and the steps required to do so. So through trial and error, my first attempts, I did manage to solder these two connectors onto the wire, but the sleeve, the blue plastic sleeve, needs to go onto the wires before you solder them. And my understanding was the opposite way around. So I'm going to be resoldering these and putting the connector onto the cable before I do the soldering. So the first thing I'm going to do here before I solder these connectors is put a little flux on the cable, and this is what I'm using right here. This is rosin paste flux. This is for electrical soldering, and I've got some electrical fine wire solder right here. And if you need to clean up some solder, you can remove solder using solder wick. Basically, you put this on the component, you apply your heat onto the tape. This is a copper tape. Push that onto your component and it will melt the solder, and this tape will absorb the solder. So it's removing excess solder. Okay, so I've got purpose here is just to tin. I want to tin the lead and prepare it for soldering the actual connector. And you can do it without tinning it, but it always works better if you do. I'm using today a Weller heat gun. And this Weller heat gun is a 100 watt / 140 watt model. 100 watts will do the job. 140 watts is a little bit nicer. You might even get by with an 80 watt soldering iron, but you might be waiting a while on that. So heat rises when it comes to soldering. So I put a little flux on here. I'm going to apply the heat. Let me turn on my power supply here. Apply some heat, and I'm going to put the solder on the top. And you can see that's tinned. Let me try a little bit on the top. You see that a little bit better. There we go. And I'm going to tin the other lead as well. I won't show both leads being tinned, I'll just show this one. Okay, I've got the leads tinned, and before I set up the soldering process, I'm going to show you the connectors. The two connectors at the top of the screen are the male connectors, and the two at the bottom of the screen are the female connectors. And you just need to determine, you know, which end are you making? Are you making a male end or are you making a female end? I'm soldering up a 20-foot cable so that I can connect some additional solar panels to an existing EC8 cable that came with my iEnergy Apex. So I'm using a couple of the females so that I can connect the other side of the cable to this. Okay, so what we have here is a little soldering vise. A bigger vise would probably work better, maybe one with a suction cup base. I've got this in my vise, and there's a little alligator clips on each end. On one side here, I've got an alligator clip holding my cable. I inserted the tinned portion of the cable into the ferrule. Again, there's a ferrule. And I just inserted the tinned end, which you saw earlier, in there. And I just want to line that up so it's pretty much right in the center. I put a little bit of flux on it already. And what I want to do is I want to solder this through the hole that's in the side of the ferrule. I've got the ferrule elevated very slightly in the front so that the solder, well, actually I want it to be pretty much level. So we want it to be just about level. The front can be elevated slightly, that won't hurt it. But we want that pretty much in the center there. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to apply heat, because heat rises. We're going to apply heat to the bottom of this and solder through the hole as it heats up. So I'm going to pull this one click, which gives me 140 watts. I'm going to hold it on the bottom. Oops. Yeah, this can be difficult because these things will move on you ever so slightly. So let's try this again. You want to avoid getting any solder on the outside of this. Messing it up again. Maybe this could be tightened down a little bit more. The first time I did this, I didn't have nearly as much trouble, but that's probably because I was bracing my hand while I was soldering. And right here, I don't really have a brace, so let me see if I can brace my hand against the vise while I hold this. I think this will work better here. So now my hand is braced, and I want to get this on the inside. You'll see when it starts to melt. There we go. You see some rosin dripping off the bottom. You can see my solder melting here. And basically I want to fill up this almost right to the top, the solder. And we're real close. Let me see if I can get a little bit more there. Yeah, we want to be pretty full, like that. And it's important not to move your connection or your joint. You don't want to bump that, or you'll get a cold solder joint. So I'm pretty happy with the position of that. I have a nice long tinned tip, and yeah, it looks like the insulation might have backed out just a little bit. That's not going to make a difference. I've got a very long tinned tip, and you can see that it's full of solder on the inside. So I'm going to let that cool off, and I'll do the other one. Okay, we're back here for the second cable. The cable was already tinned and inserted into the ferrule. A little bit of flux in the ferrule, a little bit of the rosin flux paste on the tip, and I'm holding it with alligator clips on each side. The alligator clips also do a great job working as a heat sink to remove the heat buildup, so the insulation never really even gets to the point of melting. Most of the heat is sucked over there to the left and dissipated. So again, I'm going to, and you can see it takes a fair amount of this thin solder to fill up that joint. So let me get a little bit extra here. And again, I'm going to brace my hand on the vise and hold the tip against the bottom here. Put my hand a little bit more comfortable here. Okay. Okay, we got it on. And let that heat up. Probably hear it melting. Okay, now it's going in. Fill it right up. Okay. So that is full to the top, and that looks good. Now, one thing I do want to do here is I did get a little bit of solder on the outside, and if it's in the area of where the ferrule snaps into the plastic connector, it might be an issue. So what we can do is we'll take some of the solder wick, and right here is where this is going to snap in. I'm just going to put some heat right there. And you can see the silver part, it absorbs. Okay, maybe a little bit more right there. That looks pretty good, actually. Let me try a little bit more right here. Okay, that looks pretty clean. And doing it in short spurts like that, you won't remelt the entire joint just by putting it on the top like that. So there's a lot of solder in there. It's a nice thick solder joint. So I'm going to let it cool off, and we'll go to the next step. Okay, so here, almost the finished product. We've got our connectors soldered on, and they're cool to the touch, and they're on. They're not coming off. They're on solid. And remember, we slid our connector on first, and on the connector it's labeled EC8, and then there's a plus on this side, and there's a minus on that side. So red is positive, black is negative. And then these are designed, you can see that there's a tapered end on each of these connectors, and that tapered end is going to slide into here and snap. It's not on yet. When it's on, it should pop. So one of the recommendations I finally found on Amazon, no less, under a review, and I looked at a bunch of reviews on Amazon for the EC8 connectors, which is where I bought these, and I finally found a review where a guy said, you know, this blue sleeve needs to be slid on first. That's the only way it goes. And then he said take the opposite connector. So we've got two female here, and then take a male connector and slide it on to each one. And he said to use these to press it into place until you hear a pop. Now this is my first time trying this method, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to work. I think what I want to do is maybe we'll try using the vise, because he said to press them into place. So let's see, this is a plastic connector, so I can't get too crazy with this. And let's try maybe one at a time. I don't know how well this is going to work. Yeah, I guess we'll just try both at the same time. And let's see if we can go slow enough to make these press into place. So I'm getting resistance right now. Not feeling too lucky with that. So maybe let's try one. Let's try the bottom one. There we go. That slid in there. Now I didn't hear a pop, but I was going so slow, I probably wouldn't hear a pop in the first place. But that worked. So let's try this one here. Same procedure. There we go. And that time you sort of heard a pop, or you saw it slide in. And then we'll slide this back off. Okay. So now we've got the connector on. It's into place. The red is positive, black is negative. And to show you one of the ends of the cables, this one here is an end that has the females, this is the male, and the male, I'm sorry, the side with the flat side and then rounded sides, flat side is positive. And they just slide together just like that. Okay. So using the technique of getting this on the right side of the wire is absolutely paramount to doing this. You'll never get it on the other way. And then using the other connector and a vise to slowly press it in, it works like a charm. So much easier that way. Alright, that's it for soldering an EC8 connector. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you. Ohio Preparedness, out.